Hi, I'm Dwayne from Travel by the Book, and we are here in Buffalo, New York. My friend and I are going to check out some amazing literary sites that are in the city. Now, I know most literary pilgrims like yourselves probably do not have Buffalo on your bucket list, but this whole episode is hopefully going to change that. Buffalo has some amazing things to see associated with literature, including things associated with some of the greatest authors in the world, including James Joyce, F. Scott Fitzgerald, and Mr. Mark Twain. The first things we're going to see are associated with the great Irish author, James Joyce. Now you may wonder, as I did, what does James Joyce have to do with Buffalo, or what does Buffalo have to do with James Joyce? Why is there James Joyce sites here in Buffalo? We're about to find out. We are heading over to the Silverman Library at the University of Buffalo. I'm on the campus of the University of Buffalo, and I graduated from this university in 1994 with an MFA, but I haven't been back since, and so it's been 28 years. Now, this campus is notoriously easy to get lost in because it's all interconnected and subterranean in some ways. They do that because the winters here are so harsh that they need, it allows students to be able to go from building to building without exiting into the snow. That said, there's a more nefarious reason for that design. In the 1960s, during the student protests and riots of the 60s, University of Buffalo was one of the places where students occupied the administration building, and they actually held that building longer than any other campus in the country, longer than Berkeley or Michigan and any other places where there were noted student uprisings. So when they designed shortly thereafter, started to design the North Campus, which is now the largest part of the campus, they did it in a way that created multiple axes to each building so that no building could be entirely shut off from the rest of the university, so police could storm in if needed. Anyway, I'm completely lost here. I just went in a circle because I'm not paying attention to where I'm going. So I need to find Silverman Library. I see a sign there, but it doesn't point me to where it is. Silverman Library, right this way. Once this door opens, I'll be in the cool library that is the Silverman Library. And
fourth floor.
And here we are. We're at the special collections of the library, and we're just gonna walk on in. Nope, we're not. Door is locked. Doesn't open till 10, that's why. So I was let in, and I'm here with James Maynard, who I'll introduce you to in just a second. And you are
I'm curator of the poetry collection at the University of Buffalo Libraries and coordinator of the Rare and Special Books collection.
At the University of Buffalo Silverman Library, which is a special collections library, there is the largest collection of James Joyce stuff.
It's a lot of stuff, yeah.
Anyway.
Very happy to welcome you here today to the University of Buffalo Library Special Collections. There's 3 collections here. There's the Poetry Collection, which is the library of record for 20th and 21st century poetry in English. There's a Rare and Special Books Collection, and there's also University Archives. And we're here today to, I believe, talk a little bit about the history of the Poetry Collection, and more specifically, the James Joyce Collection, which is one of our 170 plus manuscript collections, and the world's largest and most comprehensive collection of manuscripts and other materials by and about the renowned Irish author. What we like to pull for tours like this to represent the depth and the breadth of the UB James Joyce collection, because the truth is this is just a small selection of items. There are over tens of thousands of pages of manuscripts and working drafts and notebooks, lots of his realia, photographs, family portraits, the personal library that he had in Paris. We like to pull some of the materials, artifactual materials that belong to Joyce himself. So here again we can see 2 of his canes. This is a 1925 letter from Joyce's father to Joyce, wishing his son Jim a happy birthday.
Oh.
Here is Joyce's 1935 passport. Mr. James Augustine Aloysius Joyce. And here's the wonderful late portrait.
I love it.
You can see he's 5'10", occupation writer. And here you can see, here's his last stamp.
Heading
To Zurich.
Zurich.
Yep.
Excellent.
So 23 December 1940. And of course he fled Paris to Zurich in advance of the Nazi occupation.
So what year is that?
This is 1940.
Okay.
He dies a few weeks later in 1941.
How does James Joyce end up in Buffalo?
And that's a great question. The answer is that this collection was really a matter of the right people being in the right place at the right time and having a little bit of foresight and vision to know what to do when they were presented with an opportunity. And what I have out here for you today, to begin with, is a copy of the exhibition poster for the Exposition en Hommage à James Joyce, which was an exhibition that his wife Nora and son Giorgio had organized along with the support of many friends in Paris in 1949 at the Gallery Lahun. This is 8 years after Joyce passed away in 1941, and his family needed to raise some funds for themselves in post-war Europe. So a number of their friends and supporters helped them organize this exhibition, with the idea being that at the end it would be sold to a collection. So here you can see the original poster from 1949. Here you can see 2 photographs of the exhibition as it was mounted in Paris at the Gallery Lahun. And I like to begin with these photographs because you can see here many of his family portraits. You can see here his canes. And in fact, these are the 2 of the 3 canes that are on display. So you mentioned Oscar Silverman, Silverman Library before. Professor Silverman, who at that time was a member of the English department, was in Paris on sabbatical in fall of 1949 and saw this exhibition and thought, what a great series of manuscripts to potentially add to the Lockwood Memorial Library, which under the auspices of the Poetry Collection and Charles Abbott had been collecting manuscripts and other materials for contemporary poetry since 1935. So after the fall of 1950, when this material arrives, there were then 2 later acquisitions from P.W. Hubish, Joyce's publisher in New York, of the American edition of A Portrait of the Artist and other publications. Hubish donated materials in 1951 and 1959, and that was followed by, again, 2 significant, what I would call anchor acquisitions in 1959 and 1962 from Sylvia Beach, legendary proprietor of the bookstore and lending library Shakespeare and Company, and of course the publisher of Joyce's first edition of Ulysses.
Currently, the Silverman Library is featuring an exhibit on Sylvia Beach. These are all items from her that she donated to the UB Library that are part of their permanent collection that they have on display right now.
And then just to show a couple different formats of the materials that we have here, to represent Joyce's first editions, I pulled what is really one of the most spectacular association copies that you'll find in the world, which is copy number 2 of the first edition of Ulysses, 1922, published by Shakespeare and Company. And this is Sylvia Beach's copy. So here's copy number 2.
Yeah.
So it's number 2 of 1,000. We have a number of copies of the first edition, number 2, being Sylvia Beach's. We also have copy 1,000, which was Nora's copy.
And number 1 was his?
No, that's a great question. Number 1 went to another patron of his, Harriet Shaw Weaver, and that's part of the National Library of Ireland collection in Dublin.
Well, that's only fair.
And then this is a real remarkable document in homage to Beach and what she did to make this novel possible when really no one else was willing to take on such a publication risk. There's a great poem that he's written to her that she's tipped into the first edition, her copy of the first edition.
That's just an original poem that he just wrote.
Yeah. People will sometimes ask, well, Joyce was this great epic prose writer.
Right.
Why the poetry collection?
Right.
Well, the truth is, his first publications were poetry, and he continued to write verse all throughout his life.
Could you read that?
I can. This is a poem that he signs JJ after WS, and this is a poem where he's riffing off of a sonnet, Who is Sylvia, by a couple of shepherds in Shakespeare's Two Gentlemen of Verona. So it's JJ after William Shakespeare. This is a great poem for Beach in honor of the publication of the book. Who is Sylvia, what is she, that all our scribes commend her? Yankee young and brave is she, the West this man did lend her, that all books might published be. So when you take a look at our Sylvia Beach exhibition, that's why the title is That All Books Might Published Be. Here's a photograph, roughly contemporaneous with the publication of the first edition of Joyce and Beach outside Shakespeare and Company in Paris.
I love that. Both of them have so much style.
I know. So we have here 3 manuscripts representing about 25 years of Joyce's writing life. And the first is a relatively young manuscript for him. This was a fair copy version of A Portrait of the Artist, written just a year or two after he graduated from college. You can see here he's written in his sister Mabel Joyce's exercise book. And this is a fair copy of what was originally an essay version of the text. So prior to A Portrait of the Artist being published in 1916, it was an aborted novel, equally autobiographical, semi-autobiographical, called Stephen Hero. And prior to that, it was this essay, also titled A Portrait of the Artist. And now we'll jump ahead a bit to the end of the composition process for Ulysses. So we're talking here late 1920, summer 21, fall 21. This is what the Joyceans refer to as a second order notebook, and that it's a notebook where he's gone back and he's taken notes on his previous drafts. At this level of composition, it was an additional level of detail that he was adding, even in the proof stage. Something like 30% of the novel grew just at that final stage of revision, when there's not supposed to be any revision.
When you're supposed to be shortening a book, he's lengthening it.
When you're exactly, or when you're looking for final typographical errors, he is in fact continuing to compose. We're going to jump ahead now a couple years after the publication of Ulysses in 1922 and take a look at one of the notebooks for Finnegan's Wake. There are 69 of these known to exist, at least in public hands, and they're all here in Buffalo, New York. But if you spend any time with Finnegan's Wake, published in 1939, his last work, you know that that is a very different type of text with a very different type of structure that asks very different questions of the reader. And I think you can see some aspect of how to read Finnegan's Wake based upon the notebooks. And that you can see here he's composing not by the sentence or the paragraph, but simply by the individual word or the cluster, or maybe short series of phrases. The last part of our tour today that I wanted to show to represent a different facet of the U.B. James Joyce collection are examples of Joyce's personal library. So 3 here, which I think many of your viewers may recognize. The first is The Wasteland, like Ulysses, a wonderful publication, also from 1922. And here we have Eliot's inscription for James Joyce, with homage and admiration. This is W.B. Yeats's collected poems. And so the last volume that I have from Joyce's library, his Paris library, is a first edition of Ernest Hemingway's Farewell to Arms. So this was purchased in Shakespeare and Company. And I believe in her memoir she says she likes Hemingway because he was the only one who ever paid for anything. And then here you can see his inscription to Joyce, with complete admiration and much affection, Ernest Hemingway. And it says, excuse all the misspelled Italian words. They never sent me any proofs. Dashes the same, E.H. And so like Joyce, Hemingway also suffered from censorship. And in the first edition, he had all the censored words replaced with dashes. So what he did for Joyce, and this is something he did for other associates and friends, is he went back in and wrote in all of the censored words.
So what are some of these words? I can't quite read them. You want to repeat them?
Well, here he's written in the word fucking 1, 2, 3, 4 times on the page. I don't know if I've violated any of your... so here's 3 shits.
Hold on. There we go.
But it's a war novel. I mean, these are, this is how...
Hysterically. I went through page by page.
Page by page, yep.
I love it anyway.
So students quite love that.
So if I'm driving through Buffalo and I want to pull over and just check out some of this cool James Joyce stuff, can I just stop in?
You can. We do ask that people, whether it's for academic research or for tour purposes, make an appointment ahead of time. But we are a public collection, so the value of our materials is in the use that people make of it as researchers, as visitors, as scholars, as poets, as grad students. So we want to see people experience this, and in fact, are working on plans to make all of our collections more publicly accessible in the future.
So tell me about those plans.
Okay, well, we are working on a comprehensive plan for the future of the James Joyce collection. For over 80 years, we've been a cultural destination for academic researchers, and we really want to find ways to make this collection more publicly accessible. I mean, it really is our mandate to share this collection in different ways with a global audience. So we're currently working on plans for a proposed UB James Joyce Museum on South Campus. We've been able to raise some funds for that. We're in the very earliest stages of the design process. We have some idea of what we want it to do and what stories we want to tell and to what audiences, but we're hoping to raise about $1 million to hire a consultant to come in and help us actually design the comprehensive museum space.
So this is just started out. You've got a NEH grant, I believe, to sort of support the early goings of that.
That's correct.
Ultimately hoping for about $10 million.
That's what we're thinking the overall price tag will be.
So if I could just switch this, but if you're a person with some funds sitting around looking for a good cause, a James Joyce fan, UB, totally tax write-off, right?
Absolutely.
Great way to bury all that money in tax-free donation. There's a display here about the banning of Ulysses in America. At first, if anyone tried to import Ulysses into America, it would be confiscated, and that was brought up in court finally, and the judge made a decision that the book was not intentionally trying to harm anyone, and that it was a reasonable work of art, which was a landmark case for copyright and for censorship issues, and it was in 1933, and the very first edition in America was finally published legally because it had been pirated, but was legally published by Random House, and this is the first edition of Ulysses from America, signed by James Joyce to Sylvia Beach. Hey, before I go, I want to make sure I ask you about the poetry collection. Can you tell me more about that?
Sure. Founded in 1935, the Poetry Collection is the library of record for 20th and now 21st century poetry in English. It was founded by Charles Abbott with the idea of being really a laboratory for the imagination, is what he called it. The idea being to try to capture historically what is going on under the name of poetry at any given moment, with the goal of being able to capture the evolution of poetry itself in general, as well as the work of individual poets. So jump ahead today, 80 plus years, and as the Library of Record, we have about 160,000 first and third editions of poetry from the English-speaking world. We have over 9,000 little magazine titles going back to the late 19th century, over 7,000 broadsides, as well as large collections of anthologies, biographies, criticism, zines, posters, ephemera, and it really is a one-stop shop for anyone doing any type of research into modern and contemporary poetry.
This is an E.E. Cummings painting?
Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh, I knew he was a I knew he was a painter, but I've never seen any of his paintings before.
Well, poetry and painting have really been sister arts for centuries. This is a landscape painting of Mount Shakora in New Hampshire.
Wow. His book, The Enormous Room, is one of my all-time favorites.
Okay.
Yeah, I love that. Read that when I was a college student and kind of blew my mind.
Dwayne, I think you're going to have to come back for
I know.
another visit or two. The more I learn about what you're interested in, we can pull a whole very different set.
You could pull out a whole bunch of Cummings.
Joyce being one of more than 170 manuscript and archives that we have, we could do this for 170 more episodes if you wish.
All right, so I'm done. I had a great time here. This was amazing to see all this James Joyce stuff, but I can't even believe what I didn't get to see are all these things from other 19th or 20th century and 21st century poets, such as E.E. Cummings, Ezra Pound, William Carlos Williams, so many other ones. And now I'm going to keep exploring Buffalo. We're going to look at some sites that have to do with F. Scott Fitzgerald. One of the authors I told you we would discuss today is F. Scott Fitzgerald. Not someone normally associated with Buffalo. He was born in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and his family was from Minnesota. But when he was just a baby, 18 months old, his family, which was around 1898, his family moved to Buffalo. His dad got a job at Procter & Gamble, which was situated here. And when they first moved here, they stayed in the Lenox Hotel, which was an apartment complex at the time. Now, that's where I'm walking in right now. The Lenox Hotel still stands. And tonight, I'm going to stay here. So, I think what I'll do right now is check in.
So unfortunately, no one really knows exactly where the Fitzgerald family stayed when they lived here. I've checked, I've tried to find out, I've checked with the hotel, and no one really knows. They were here, but we don't know where exactly.
Hi, good. I'm staying here filming a little thing for YouTube about F. Scott Fitzgerald. And so I'm just filming your lobby right now. Alright, I'm just down the hall. Now this place in its day was one of the most elegant hotels around, obviously. It's no longer quite as classy, but it's still a fun place to be. Alright. So here's our little room. It is certainly not super fancy, but it looks clean. And hey, I'm staying where the Scott Fitzgerald family might have stayed. Bathroom looks clean. If you're a geek like me, then staying where F. Scott Fitzgerald might have lived, fancy or not, is worth the stay. Now, if I had my wife with me, she might argue this point, and she might be a little upset that we were here and that we were not staying somewhere nicer. All right, well, after F. Scott Fitzgerald's family lived in the Lenox Hotel, they weren't here that long. They were only here for about a year, and then they moved into a home. They moved first they moved away for a couple years to Syracuse, but then they came back. When F. Scott Fitzgerald was about 3, they came back, and they lived just around the corner in a house on Irvine Street. So let's go. I think we could probably just walk to that house. Irving Street is beautiful. A very quiet, kind of off the grid little street, tree-lined street, just a block away from Delaware Avenue, which is one of the biggest streets in Buffalo. So one of the things I've always just loved about Buffalo are these old homes. Here we have one home, and then right here with the flag is 29 Irving Street. In 1903, when Scott Fitzgerald was a lad of 6 years old, the family moved back to Buffalo, and they moved into the house directly behind me. And it's really just a block away from the Lennox. So they really came right back to the same old neighborhood that they were in before. Lived here for about 18 months. And this neighborhood hasn't changed that much. Most of these homes are older than the one that the Fitzgeralds lived in, and they're still standing. It was described as a tree-lined street where the kids would play up and down the road, playing baseball and other games, and the Fitzgerald would go to the local theater, and apparently Scott would reenact a lot of the plays that he saw with his friends here in the neighborhood. Whenever we're showing private residences on the show, I'm just asking you to be respectful and to make sure that you're courteous. It's not appropriate to knock on the door and to ask for a tour because they're not open for tours. That said, I just talked to one of the gentlemen who is a renter here, and we talked for about 10-15 minutes, and he told me a lot of fun things about the history of the home that he happens to know. So people are generally fairly generous and willing to talk to you as long as you're respectful and polite. The tenant was telling me that this original porch here is original to the house. So while there's been a lot of changes and additions, there's been a lot of additions to the back of this house. The front porch and these steps, well, at least the portico here was original to the house. Now, he also said that at the time Fitzgerald was here, that the road went clear up to the gate here, that this sidewalk was a later addition. I do want to point out that during the evening, this street has very little parking. There's very few garages, and everyone has to park on the street. However, during the day, there's lots of parking. And so there's not a lot of parking out in front of the Lennox. So what you might want to do is come look at this house first, find parking, and then stroll down the road to look at the Lennox. Every home on this street is historical and has a story behind it, and it's certainly worth a pleasant stroll. Unless you're here in the middle of a Buffalo blizzard, then you might want to stay in your car. From the house at Irvine Street in 1905, the Fitzgeralds moved to the house behind me at 71 Highland Drive. The Fitzgeralds lived here for quite a while. It wasn't until 1912 that they moved out. He played in this neighborhood, played with kids apparently across the street. There's one story about that his biographer talks about coming here because he had heard that Scott had a swing set up in the attic. And when he came here, the owner let him up into the attic, and he was able to find a couple of nail holes up in a rafter where the swing must have been mounted. They stayed here until 1912, and then they moved back to St. Paul after his father lost his job at Procter & Gamble. So we've seen 3 homes that where F. Scott Fitzgerald lived in his childhood, both as a baby and as a young boy. Think about the homes that you spent your time at when you were from the years of, a child to a 10-year-old, 12-year-old, 11-year-old young person. And those are memories that are very formative and very significant to you. So there's no way that his time in Buffalo didn't somehow shape his stories. And now we're going to take a break. We've been going at it all morning. It's lunchtime, and when you're hungry in Buffalo, there's only one thing that you start thinking about, and that's buffalo wings. And having lived here for a few years, I fell in love with buffalo wings. And you really just can't get buffalo wings anywhere other than Buffalo. It's kind of like bagels in New York. Once you've had a New York bagel, any other bagel just feels lame. And I think the same thing's true with buffalo wings. So this tour, which I'm about to go on, takes you to various places in the history of the creation of the buffalo wing. It's a tour that's gotten all sorts of positive reviews, and I heard about it about 8 years ago, and I've been really excited to come ever since.
I'm really excited about today. We've got some very special VIPs. Visit Buffalo Niagara, the Hostel Buffalo Niagara, and an actual paying customer.
Oh, wait a minute.
So, we're going to have a great time. And as Drew mentioned, today is National Chicken Wing Day. So what better day to be in Buffalo, New York, on Buffalo Bike Tours, wing ride, than today? So we're going to be diving deep into the legend and lore of Buffalo's most famous and possibly most misunderstood culinary dish, the buffalo wing. It's going to be our mission today. I'm not sure if we'll be successful, but to discover and uncover who was the true inventor of the buffalo wing. Well, this town back east, they say, folks make fun of every day. No one knows exactly why, but the out-of-towners, they always try and say, Buffalo's got snowbanks 10 feet tall. We got weather cold enough to freeze your balls. We got city planning that's quite ill-advised, and potholes of greater size. So try not to pay any mind. Come on and get on your bikes for the
Buffalo wing ride.
There we go, we said them.
Buffalo wing ride.
Well, whether you are from Baltimore or Utah, or you're a local who works for the Visitors Center, or you work at the Niagara Buffalo Hostel, you'll love the
Buffalo wing ride.
Well, Buffalo can be a god and lead a lot of paradise to live in or sleep. Believe it or not, you won't find it so hard if you ain't been on a
Buffalo wing ride. Yay! This is really dangerous, but I'm doing it anyway. This is a really great tour because it's not just about food, it's about the cultural history of the city. And it's really a rich cultural history. And Mark really gets it right. He really brings us into some of the bad situations that have developed in Buffalo and cities just like it all over the world. Our tour guide, Mark, introduced me to an author I had not yet heard about. William Wells Brown was a runaway slave who settled in Buffalo and became active in the abolitionist movement. He lived in Buffalo for about 10 years, and while he was there, he helped other escaped slaves either settle nearby or escape over to Canada. He eventually left Buffalo, traveled widely throughout Europe, and eventually settled in Boston. While he was an essayist and wrote a lot of other important pieces, he may be today is most noted as being the first African American to have published a novel. That novel, called Clotel, or The President's Daughter, was published in London in the 1850s and was the story of the illegitimate black child of Thomas Jefferson, or a fictional daughter of Thomas Jefferson, because we know he fathered many black children. Anyway, that came out in 1850, which is pretty crazy. And so William Wells Brown, Buffalo's very proud to have been part of his life, and he's someone you should definitely check out.
Fascinating character. He often feuded with fellow abolitionist Frederick Douglass. But anyways, yeah, he lived right here on this particular piece of property. We have a very special guest meeting us. Her name is Lina Brown Young. Now, Lina Brown Young is the daughter of John Young. He was the proprietor of Buffalo's very first chicken wing shop called Wings and Things on Jefferson Avenue. It started in 1961. I sat down to interview Lina and her mom, the widow of John, Christine, and she was not only, willing to meet me, but I was so curious because her recipe was a little bit different. It was called mumbo wings, and I never had mumbo wings, and I was like, what do these taste like? So she said, Mark, you still have the recipe. So she made me a batch of Dad's wings, and I was like, you gotta have this too.
My dad started his business, food business, in around 62, 63. He met a gentleman, or knew a gentleman, that was a boxer from Washington that was going through Buffalo, and that man told him about wings that were being sold in Washington, D.C., and told him about whole wings that were being sold, and how it was a pretty good seller, and suggested that my dad might want to try that and see what happens. And my dad did try it, and well, from there it was just a great thing. So he and his sister started that first business, but quickly he went up on Jefferson to High Street, which I believe this is this picture. But that's where he became, he started selling the wings there at Carlton, but then he had to expand and get a little bigger and went solo, not with his sister, and opened up Mumbo Wings, John Young's Mumbo Wings, and called himself King of Wings. He started selling whole wings. Like I said, was a big seller. He did his version of mumbo sauce, quite different from the mumbo sauce that Washington folks in Washington were selling. So eventually he moved up to the Utica and Jefferson spots, which is where he probably became the most well known. It was the larger of the restaurants. He said the first day he opened, people were loving these wings, and they were just lined up around the corners to get these wings. But he never wavered from his position. He felt that to cut the wing was to tarnish it. So he continued in serving whole wings, always serving it in mumbo sauce. He never did the blue cheese and celery and all that. So that's what you guys will be serving today. We hope you enjoy it. Okay?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so the wings aren't broken, right?
Nope,
All three quarters.
You have to do it. You got to put the work in. Get a tip, the drumette, the flat, everything all there. And sometimes people like it a little spicy. So if people ask me, then, we just add more pepper. But generally, I just kind of make it mild because you never know, what people. So mild is usually safe.
This is the mumbo sauce from John Young. I'm commentating here. And it's delicious. It's fruity, which is a different taste.
Did you cook a lot with your dad? Did you cook
I did.
with him?
I worked with my dad from probably, oh my God.
John Young was not only a culinary pioneer, but he also was a literary pioneer as well here in Buffalo. He wrote this poem in 1981. I see Buffalo's really talking crowd. I know they're sounding off nice and loud. I hear some talking when they sing, so I join them all and do my talking with the chicken wing.
Love it. And what does it say on the back? Anybody can do wings, but if you don't have the mumbo sauce, you don't have anything. Love it.
This was the site of John Young's very first chicken wing shop. Records say 1961, 1962. There's this incredible mural, and so I asked Lina where the whereabouts is it. We couldn't find it, and we decided to recreate it with John Baker and the Urban Arts Collective. So we worked with them to kind of recreate this mural on the site. We talk in some of our history tours about reading the landscape, about the physical landscape, what is remembered and what is not remembered in the city. Even something as boring as a vacant plot of land or a parking lot can actually tell us a story about power and dynamics, and so we're really proud to have helped create a public remembrance for a really important part of Buffalo history. Anywhere you go in the world, people know Buffalo Wings. And to acknowledge chicken wing pioneer, restaurateur, black entrepreneur, very proud.
Eventually, we ended up at the world-famous Anchor Bar. The Anchor Bar is widely known as the place where the buffalo wing, as we know it today, was originated.
They opened up their first restaurant, the Anchor Bar, down at the waterfront. Hence, it had a nautical theme. So they had anchors, they had lanterns, they had a little rowboat that you can get in and take your photograph with. And they moved up here in the 1940s. And this was an Italian restaurant. It was known for steak and spaghetti. As legend goes, their son his name was Dominic, and he was the bartender. He had a bunch of friends come over late at night, and they usually got chicken backs, deliveries of chicken backs to make some of the stock for their soup. One day, apparently, they got a misdelivery. It was chicken wings. I don't know what to do with these, but Dominic's friends came over, and they were super hungry. He said, "Mom, can you make us something to eat?" So she threw those chicken wings in the deep fryer and served them up. They were an instant hit. And things really got cooking with chicken wings in the early 1990s. So most culinary historians will say something happened profoundly in Buffalo between the years of 1990 and 1994. Y'all know what happened between those years? They were in Buffalo, New York?
The Bills lost 2 years in a row in the Super Bowl. 4 years in a row.
3 years, 4 years.
Yeah, 4 years in a row.
20 years. Oh my God, what is it? 20 years in a row.
Stop rubbing it in.
Yeah. Between those years, I used to work in TV, so I used to work at WTV. We were airing the games, and right when they went before a local commercial, they would cut away to, like, it's called the bumper. They showed the landscape, they showed, like, Niagara Falls, and during those years, they would cut away to the Anchor Bar, eating this local regional delicacy known as wings. Well, all of a sudden, buffalo wings, something we never heard of as Buffalonians, began appearing on the menus of KFC, Domino's, other major chains. And a legend was born. Anywhere you go in the world today, people know Buffalo is not just a city, but a flavor that can be applied to eggplant, cauliflower, anything you want can be
Pretzel
Buffalo
bites.
flavor. Even, I think we have chicken wing ice cream.
Oh gosh.
This was actually an April Fool's joke.
Okay.
But
We're at
we
Anchor
do
Bar,
occasionally, like
famous
Cardinal does
wings
it.
here, where apparently this traditional buffalo wing was invented, and or just this wing.
You guys do
A helicopter?
are you, like, flats,
And I'm eating.
Oh, you're flats.
Well, I took a drum too, but I typically like flats. What did you get? I think most people outside of Buffalo don't necessarily associate the flavor with the city.
Oh,
they
and so-
associate the animal
Yeah,
with it.
yeah.
I've even had some people, oddly enough, ask where the wings come off of bison,
Yeah.
not realizing
Crazy.
that they're eating chicken.
Is it
Locals will
growing
come
up?
after you if you call them buffalo wings in Buffalo. We call them wings.
Wings,
but
right.
I've always kind of resented that statement because why wouldn't you want to promote the city within the name?
Yeah.
It's like we do have people who want to go on a food tour, and they are like, it's interesting because like a lot of bicyclists are vegetarian or like vegan. They're like, I don't want to do the vegan or the chicken wing tour. I actually have a request. Can you do the chicken wing tour but make it vegan?
I want to point out this building right here with the windows, because as soon as this tour is over, we're going to come right back to it. Buffalo Wing Ride! Buffalo Wing Ride! Hey!
My name is Brian. I'm from Baltimore, Maryland, at Beyond BMO Online, and I thought the Buffalo Wing Ride was absolutely amazing. It was fun to get to see the city by bike and not just by car, and the wings that we had from the stops that we stopped at were great. It was a good time.
All right, so I just finished my bike tour, Buffalo Wing Ride, and I can't recommend it enough. I had so much fun. I really want to recommend it if you live in Buffalo, because I think it's one of those things that people who are in a town often don't know a lot of their town's own personal sort of story. And if you're in Buffalo, you should definitely do this if you're a Buffalo resident or in the area. And if you have guests coming to Buffalo, I highly recommend it as something you do with your guests to show them the town. Now, we're going to go check out a cool library and learn about the third author that we said we'd learn about, and that's Mark Twain. I'm standing next to a rather uninteresting modern building. It's a beautiful building. It's just new and modern and seemingly has nothing to do with Buffalo's great literary history. However, this is 472 Delaware Avenue. Right on the spot, there used to be a very large mansion, and in that mansion lived none other than Mark Twain. This library behind me is the Buffalo and Erie County Public Library. And apart from being just a cool, big city library, they've got a really cool special collection. Back in the day, the man who ran this library became friends with a local newspaper editor, Samuel Clemens. And over the course of Mark Twain's career, they stayed in touch, and Mark Twain gave him several really interesting and exciting manuscripts. And over there, they've collected a bunch of other things, and they have it all on display in a special room here that I can't wait to see. So let's go check it out. Okay, we're walking inside. We got Harold. There we have a caterpillar. Very hungry caterpillar.
And you're in the Grosvenor department in the Central Library, and it's got a pretty famous in these circles, I guess, but certainly important collection, not only because of the dedication we have to local history, but really the genealogy section. So you have people coming from all over the country doing their family research. Like the resources we have are very extensive.
Yeah, I couldn't help noticing the card catalogs because you don't see a lot of these anymore, but the librarian here, as Isaac was telling me, that this is for their genealogical collection, as well as over here for the record collection, and they still use it, and he says he still adds things to it, and that's pretty cool. This is so fun. It's so nostalgic. Most young people would have no idea how to work this. On the third floor of this cool library, they have an exhibit currently up. This is a temporary exhibit celebrating children's stories throughout the centuries.
Here's a favorite of mine when I was a kid. Mike Mulligan and his steam shovel. And of course there's Goodnight Moon. And I always loved Harold and his purple crayon. And I always loved Ezra Jack Keats' books. Snowy Day was a favorite of mine. I loved that book, looking at the pictures. And of course, everyone loves Where the Wild Things Are.
Okay, they also have an exhibit here celebrating Buffalo's music history, starting with Harold Arlen, who wrote Somewhere Over the Rainbow, as well as other hit songs of the era. All right, so they have here things from Rick James. We saw his childhood home on our Buffalo Wing Ride the Goo Goo Dolls, singer-songwriter Annie DeFranco. There's something here about Blue Oyster Cult and the song Don't Fear the Reaper, and about the Saturday Night Live sketch, the more Cowbell sketch. Buffalonian David Lucas was a producer who insisted that the album, that Don't Fear the Reaper was on the album, and that I have the cowbell, and he even played the cowbell in the recording. So, all thanks to Buffalo. More cowbell. So, I've asked and been told, okay, here's our Mark Twain room right here.
Yeah, so this is our room. Dedicated Mark Twain room. The reason that we have this room is because it not only marks the fact that we have the Adventures of Huckleberry Finn manuscript, it also reveals, because a lot of people don't realize it, that Mark Twain lived here for a brief period of time.
Mark Twain donated the original manuscript of Huckleberry Finn to the library. At first, he turned in just the second half, and he said that he couldn't find the first half, and he thought that it must have been destroyed by the publisher. And so that's sort of what everybody believed. And then about 100 years later, the granddaughter of that librarian whom he had given it to found an old steamer trunk in her mother's attic and opened it up, and inside were the missing half of the handwritten manuscript of Huckleberry Finn. And it got returned to the library. What apparently had happened is Mark Twain must have finally found it and then given it to the librarian, because there was a letter of some kind with a date, and he had given it to the librarian, and then he had died, like right after. Maybe he was so surprised and happy to get it that it killed him. This is the librarian, James Fraser Gluck, who had befriended Mark Twain back in the days when Twain lived in, or Samuel Clemens rather, lived in Buffalo. Then his wife, his widow, moved to California to live with their daughter, and must have thrown it into a steamer trunk, and there it stayed for 100 years until it was found. The original handwritten text of Huckleberry Finn. Here we have the steamer chest where the granddaughter of James Gluck found the first half of the handwritten manuscript, just sitting in an attic in California.
It's our pleasure and honor, and we're just very, very proud of the fact that we have a manuscript that has so much importance in American literature.
Can you tell me about where it is now? It's not,
Okay.
I mean, we have a couple actual leaves. Are these actual leaves or facsimiles?
The two leaves in the center are actual leaves.
Mm-hmm.
We rotate them. We don't keep the same leaves out for extended periods of time, because any light, even though this is an archival setting, can be damaging over time. So we do rotate those out. The title page that you see is a replica, a facsimile of the actual title page, which is included with the manuscript.
He handwrote.
He handwrote it, and he was very specific about how he wanted it, which is very interesting. We see in the manuscript itself changes in the size of the paper, changes in the ink, a lot of changes, and the occasional pencil in the manuscript. So,
Like you see that on this page.
yeah,
Or
yeah.
on both these pages, there's a little.
Yeah. So scholars have studied it for the changes.
Sure.
There's there's a body of work written about it, I would say. And it's interesting to look at the manuscript because you can see the edits that he makes,
Mhm.
things that he changes, and things that he doesn't change. So most recently, we took the manuscript and we had the paper treated, conserved for the acidity that was in some of the paper. We wanted to stabilize and make sure that we'd have the manuscript, for a long time into the future.
Sure.
We completely recased, rehoused it properly according to archival standards. We worked with a large conservation outfit. But the great thing about it is we had it fully digitized,
Right.
and we had it done the way it should be done. Not only is it available to view in this room on this kiosk, but it's also on our website,
Oh.
which is tremendous because you can actually look at this and see those changes in ink and that I was talking about, and
Yeah.
also the changes in paper, and you can zoom in.
Thank you so much, and I love how your mask matches your shirt. So do you have like a mask for every shirt?
It's just a coping skill, that's all. Dealing with it.
This is like coming to the Louvre. This is like coming to the Louvre and looking at the Mona Lisa. I am leaving the Buffalo and Erie County Public Library. It's been a great tour. Learned a ton, seen a lot of great stuff. And I have to say, as I walk outside here, start talking louder, I have to say that this is one cool library, but the coolest library is the one closest to you. All right, well, that's the end of our visit to Buffalo, to literary Buffalo. I've only really scratched the surface. Buffalo has had such a great, unique history, and there's so much here. A lot of authors who have lived here throughout its history that are worth looking into. I've just looked at 3 of kind of the most famous, but there's certainly others that I haven't touched on. If you're near Buffalo, definitely come and check it out. I'm Dwayne from Travel by the Book. Please subscribe if you haven't, and we'll catch you on the flip side.